for those of you who were here yesterday afternoon, it may make sense to recall I talked about the way in which the internet has moved from a place you go to or a thing you visit to a kind of overlay to the physical world. And one of the great causes of this is the Internet of Things. And that, in a sense, is how we're now moving from talking about data in time to data in space. This awareness of everything receiving information and possibly in two-way communications, but I think primarily we'll talk about the receipt and monitoring of information with Michael Chui of McKinsey. If you were out front earlier, you may have seen this handout. I urge you to take one if you have not.
It has sensors in it.
It has sensors in it, and will track you and, you know, establish your relative income level, and that'll be useful for the people at McKinsey. But seriously, folks, there is on the back a link to a QR code, or rather, there's a QR code that will link to a McKinsey study that's coming up this summer on the Internet of Things, which will be something of an update and then its own piece on some stuff you may have picked up earlier about some technologies of the future that McKinsey published available earlier. I spoke yesterday about how we kind of arbitrage the present with new technologies and create new efficiencies, but then there's a flywheel because that creates a feedback and a cash flow, if you will. It frees up capital and kind of informs about what areas you're going to build into that create entirely new technologies and industries. So I wanted to bring out Michael to talk a little bit about the new study and what the implications are for the present and the next couple of years.
Quentin.
Yes. Oh, I got to turn on. All right. I flipped it.
Wow.
Oh, yeah?
It should say mute. Yeah, you should be good.
I'm good? Okay. If not, I'll just shout. So, Michael, I'll let you talk for a minute. What is taking shape as you're finalizing this thing? What are the things that pop out to you?
Well, you know, as you said, this isn't the first time I think people in this audience have heard of the Internet of Things. It's certainly picked up a lot of interest in recent years. We published first on it over 5 years ago. It's something that we've continued to look at over the past several years. Just keep going. Sometimes you have connectivity issues with it. Sometimes the sensors don't work. Sometimes the mesh.
Yeah. So basically, there's one person talking on stage as far as the internet is concerned.
So we haven't solved all the technical problems yet. But one of the things we wanted to do, because it's becoming increasingly salient, and in fact, one of the things we're seeing is actual use cases being performed, is to try to update our perspective on what the economic potential might be, and then some of the enablers and obstacles to capturing that value. The other thing we wanted to add to the overall dialogue, certainly other people have published on this before. I'll let someone do his thing. I'm a big fan of expertise. Thank you. Other people have published on IoT before, and we took on and studied some of the work that they've done. But we think we've added some additional perspectives and insight in terms of the way we think about how IoT can create value. One of them is just looking at the phenomenon with a different lens. So, we as management consultants very easily think about opportunities in terms of industry sectors, right? So what does this mean for oil and gas? What does this mean for automotive? What does this mean for consumer packaged goods? And we continue to look at things that way, though in some ways the world is organized that way. But when you think, as you mentioned, about the Internet of Things being, combining the physical world with the virtual world, embedding sensors in the physical world, another way to cut the world is by the physical environments in which these technologies are deployed. So we started looking at settings. We looked at things like home. Now, lots of people have thought about smart homes before. We looked at vehicles. And again, we've thought about vehicles before. But then we've also looked at factories. And one interesting thing is when we think about factories, we define them as standardized production environments. So for us then, certain parts of hospitals are actually more like factories. And so we included that as part of the setting. We looked at work sites, which are unlike factories, which are standardized production environments. These are bespoke or custom environments where production happens, like a mine or upstream oil and gas or a forest. And so when we look at things with a setting lens rather than just a vertical lens, some of the insights you find are, within a setting, you cross verticals. And those are opportunities that you might not have analyzed in the same way if you just looked at a home and didn't look at a home and you just thought about the energy sector, or you just thought about consumer packaged goods within a home, or you just thought about consumer electronics. Rather, when you start to look across all those put together in one setting, you start to think about things like the value of interoperability, which is one of the, I think, signature findings of the work that we did.
You're saying there's a very interesting split to examine right away, which is consumer versus industrial. And if I look at two of the areas that jump out at me, one would be what Google is doing in the home and with personal transport with the driverless cars, and also with maps and on phones. And then the other would be General Electric, which is doing enormous amounts of stuff in the industrial internet. Which one do you think will be more impactful or might change more radically in the short term?
Yeah, this is one of those things where as we observe what's written in the hype and what's easy to understand, I'm wearing a wearable, for instance, right now, right? And so we think there's tremendous opportunity for consumers. And there are companies going after that, and I think that makes tremendous sense. When we look globally, and we try to take a global view, right, the Global Institute, and you look across the entire economy at B2C versus B2B opportunities, we're finding that the B2B opportunities are maybe 2/3 of the actual potential pie.
Yeah.
Now, the pie is measured in trillions of dollars, right? So there's still a lot left in consumer. But when you think about what's actually possible across the economy, a lot of it's in B2B. Now, that being said, there's an interesting intersection there, right? So I'm wearing this wearable. I get to see how many steps I have, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We actually think that a lot of the value that will come from the B2C opportunities is when you connect the B2C opportunities with B2B. And
Can I just say something?
Go ahead, sure.
Do you look like a really fit guy, and you're wearing this fitness band? How many people saw the guy from Automotive yesterday? Okay, Automotive is this app you download to your phone, and it looks at your driving habits and makes you a safer driver. Can tell you how to improve your driving. I think people who download apps to be a safer driver, and people who want to know about their heart rate so they can be healthier, are the people who don't need this stuff in the first place, right? It should be like bad drivers should be downloading that, but they're not going to, right? And people with like bad health habits should get a Fitbit, but they're not going to. And that's kind of actually, it's a facetious point, but it's true. A lot of those behaviors won't change readily. And we are talking about behavior modification or behavior observation in many cases. In commerce, the stakeholders have interest in changing behaviors and will change it. And I think that's one reason the industrial Internet of Things will move a lot faster.
I think when you think about B2B customers, they tend to be more sophisticated. You have people in procurement, you have people trying to understand the economics of things. But I do think that
Well, you also have pragmatic realities, like the guy driving the car doesn't own the car.
Often true, often true. But I think one of the things that we're starting to do is try to create the right economic incentives for consumers. And so, if you look at healthcare, for instance, if you're able to incent consumers, or if you look at consumer drivers, if you're able to incent them to drive more safely, that's more likely to happen. And so that's actually the point I was going to make, which is the B2B2C opportunity. When the quote industrial Internet of Things or the B2B Internet of Things intersects, right? If this thing gets connected to the quote professional healthcare system, the payers and the providers, then you might incent people to have more healthy behaviors, to drive more safely, and so, or to save more energy. All of those things can happen, but it requires a connection. Consumer only is powerful. Consumer connected to the rest of B2B, I think, is even more powerful, and a lot of the Internet of Things opportunities will come through doing that.
Well, you're talking about interoperability there, which is something we said before. that also means many of these categories will be even less hard and fast than they were before.
Yeah, we think interoperability is huge, and that was a hypothesis we tested during our research. If you look at all the devices you could put in a connected home nowadays, they're often satisfying a single use case, right? You could do demand response for energy management, or you could have your Wi-Fi stereo system, and you can control that with your app, et cetera. But you would imagine that there's great value in having those things talk to each other. And we try to size what that impact is. And almost half of the value you can capture using IoT. And by value, it's not just value that companies can achieve through profits, but value we get as consumers or as customers. You can almost double the amount of value, is another way to put it, by having these systems connect to each other. Now, it's not necessarily...
Can you give me a for instance?
Let me give you an industrial case, for instance. We found in some asset-heavy industries, upstream oil and gas, for instance, on an oil platform, many of the individual components that go into that platform now are connected. Because all of the vendors, all of the manufacturers are creating connected devices. And many of them have these types of services that are predictive maintenance, right? Which is terrific. It's one of the real values that IoT can create. Rather than waiting for something to break or just checking it every once in a while, you can predict when it's going to break. And we think that's tremendous value. But when you look at only those devices individually, and you compare them to all of the failure modes which could actually occur, sometimes upwards of 50% of the failure modes can only be predicted when you combine data from those devices together. And so when you start to look at examples such as that, this idea of making sure that the devices actually can interoperate. By the way, that doesn't necessarily mean open standards. That's one way to achieve it. You can also have systems that, middleware or other systems that allow data to be integrated. But when you are able to combine data from multiple sources, which is again a result that we found from big data, but increasingly in Internet of Things data, that's when you can create another order of magnitude of value.
You also said that an immense amount of this data is not being used and may not be used. Is that an issue?
We don't think it's an issue, but we just think that means there's so much additional headroom. So again, if you look in that upstream oil and gas case, some of our folks, their clients are oil and gas companies. They spend a whole bunch of time on these offshore platforms. Some of these offshore platforms now have 30,000 sensors in them. Soon they'll have 60,000 sensors on them. And they did an analysis. How much of the data that gets generated by all these, what the exhaust data, how much of it actually gets touched or used for making decisions, as opposed to, and it just being generated for log files or what have you, right? Splunk can look through those. No, but anyway, less than 1%. Less than 1% of that data is ever touched and used for decision making. Now you might say, well...
Now is that category? That is to say there are just 1% of categories that are examined, or data on the whole, you only need a little sample of each?
If you look at all the data that's generated on this platform, less than 1% is used for decision making. Now you might say, well, maybe you don't need more. That's a good question, but at least what we're saying is we're generating more data than we're even trying to figure out what can happen to it. And then the other thing that we found in use case after use case after use case, or at least in setting after setting after setting, is not only are we generating data and just throwing it away, not even using it, not even examining it, but the data that even is used, it's mostly used for two purposes. One is anomaly detection, set off an alarm when something goes wrong, or just real-time control. And we think that a lot of the value, as we looked at use case after use case, comes from either optimization or predictive. We talked about predictive maintenance just a moment ago. And so just the amount of headroom, the opportunity for people in this room to create applications, to look at use cases that create even more value, there's just a ton of, a gold mine of data that can be used, and then a huge number of things you can do with it.
There's a couple of interesting vectors going on, though, when you describe that, because there is the amount of value or the opportunity for efficiency gain or the opportunity for new value creation, if you will. But then there's also disruption of the larger system that has to be managed. At IBM, they love this line, it takes 18 months to turn bauxite from dirt in the ground into the aluminum in a Coke can. And that's mostly because stuff is sitting around. And that's really, fantastic. I love that line. It's great, But it also, I was thinking it through, it's like, so if we shorten that to 2 months, what's that going to do to the world shipping system, right? What does that mean for longshoremen? What does that mean for trucking? There's all these sort of knock-on things because there's just a lot of inefficiency baked in right now. So you kind of have to manage, how many parts am I going to disrupt if I do something vastly more efficient, and how much of that do I own?
Yeah, the knock-on effects are, second or third bounces of the ball, however you want to call it, third-order effects are, in many cases can be profound. I think the case you just gave is a great one, though, because if you think about supply chains and the fact that they're typically very loosely coupled right now, it does introduce a whole bunch of inefficiencies, and it's mostly because of lack of transparency. You don't know, when this is coming, so we have safety stock here, and we don't have safety stock here, and then you get whiplash, all the kinds of things that operations people, try to work on.
So you're saying data sharing will probably end up in contract agreements?
Absolutely, and we're starting to see it already. And then just, the Internet of Things creating more data, gives us more grist for the mill. That different players in a supply chain can actually use, be more predictive, and be more efficient.
Yeah, and you get to have calls on knowledge of where something is at any point.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's interesting. What do you think will be a more interesting area? Something that isn't well understood now, like a forest or an ocean, where there aren't many sensors, but as you say, the activity there is somewhat intermittent. Or something supposedly well-trafficked and well-traveled that's in high use, and you can put in an overlay of new kinds of sensors, which is possibly the richer area to go at.
It's a great question. I'm not sure. I mean, if the question sort of, what might be surprising, or, what's a different way to think about things. I mentioned predictive maintenance, which is, again, for industrials, it's hugely powerful. And then I think we all know that there is tremendous potential opportunity in healthcare for all kinds of reasons, right? Roughly half the things we prescribe, do no good or worse for a patient. Sad, but maybe kind of true. If you think about the human body as a complex machine, what would it mean to apply what we know about predictive maintenance to healthcare, and vice versa, potentially, although probably more in that direction. I think looking for those use cases where similar types of analysis, real-time analysis about failure, et cetera, can be applied in different places, I think can be quite powerful. Because right now, and I think appropriately so, a lot of the Internet of Things applications which derive value are very niche-y, and I think that's appropriate, because in order to capture value for a lot of these applications, you really need to know that domain deeply, and that's very challenging for some companies that typically are horizontal, telcos and others. So needing to learn that is very powerful. But then if you want to leverage that knowledge in a way that's, or that IP that you've built, which is effective, it's helpful to look for analogous situations where you can start to bring that over. And so I think that's one of those examples.
And can you cite some companies or institutional practices, maybe that's a better way to go, that are sort of at the cutting edge of this? You mentioned healthcare, and I see a lot of stuff around Fitbits, but is it making an impact yet?
They have a lot of opportunity, let's put it that way, in healthcare.
Yeah, but are heavily regulated industries the right place to go?
Yeah, I think there is this high correlation between the obstacles and the amount of opportunity. I've said on this stage before, healthcare, public sector, and education are some of the parts of the economy which have not yet benefited from technologies like Internet of Things.
Well, it's very interesting. A lot of that regulation was written just at a time when mainframe computing was entering each of those industries. It's sort of mid-'70s stuff. And that's the problem. It reflects that technological habit. I don't know how you work it back, because all the protection against litigation has to do with behaving according to those rules from the mainframe days.
Some of it is. Some of it, came with Affordable Care Act. HIPAA, et cetera, is a little more recent. I think when we talk about a policy dialogue, we need to bring that understanding of technology to that policy dialogue. And over time, some say in a democracy you get the government that you deserve in the long term. So being able to engage in those dialogues is important. The other thing that's happening is, this isn't the only jurisdiction in the world
I was going there next.
And so, if you look at different markets, they do have different data protection rules. They do have, different incentives built into the economics of different industries. And so, we'll see experimentation as a result.
Really, and there are also areas that have high systems of control, but also a high openness to corporate experimentation. In Singapore, they're really counting every car now.
Yeah.
They're counting every person going on every bus now. But they also allow corporations to do all sorts of things.
Yeah, there are lots of places that have recognized Internet of Things can be a great driver of not only economic returns to companies, not only profits, entrepreneurism, et cetera, but real benefits to citizens. And so I think we'll see that increasingly. One of the things that we did look at as part of our research too is just, again, a lot of the writing now is about things that we would expect would show up first in call it advanced countries, developed markets, OECD 30, whatever you want to describe it. When we looked at the potential leapfrog and other differential opportunities within developing markets, those opportunities were almost as large.
Mm-hmm.
The ways that IoT could be applied in those countries was almost as large. In fact, they probably would have been even larger, but for the fact that, roughly speaking, everything's more expensive in developed markets. So the volume in developing markets, the potential volume is much higher. The value per use case here in developed markets is higher, and so that's why they're roughly equivalent. But if you think that volume is a precursor to value, mm-hmm. so as developed markets actually capture more value, you could imagine that accelerating in other places.
That's, in a sense, that kind of arbitrage versus novelty split. We're just going to arbitrage existing installed systems. They're going to put in novel systems without a lot of legacy. And eventually that means they may have more efficient ones. I covered cell phones in the 90s, and they were held back here in part because we just had all these payphones. People kind of didn't see the need the same way. Whereas if they were installing in China, you didn't think about stringing wires up and installing fixed phones. You just put up cell towers. It was much faster. And I think you might see something similar in urban areas in the developing world.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Legacy, there's tremendous benefits from legacy. You get knowledge, all kinds of other things, but it a lot of times can hold you back in terms of the next generation of technology. And I'm sure we'll see examples where in developing markets, because they didn't have to worry about some legacy infrastructure, legacy set of interests
mm-hmm.
that they might leapfrog ahead.
One thing McKinsey works on a lot, obviously, is the psychology and sociology of change. What are the incentives that make people accept a new system?
Well, money helps.
Yeah, money's good.
But the truth is, there are lots of other ways to think about that incent people to do it. The whole idea of behavioral economics. What's default versus what isn't. The perception of value with regard to convenience.
Well, money is very interesting that way. In Stockholm, they reduced traffic. I think they put 40,000 more people a day on mass transit by putting in congestion charges of about 50 cents. It wasn't significant money to anybody who had a car, but nonetheless it forced a change in behavior.
Yeah, no, it's. I think we see this over and over again, where the value placed on things like convenience, the value placed on not having to wait. We did some work, for instance, on just being able to provide people with public transit information about how long it will take for the bus to get there. Being able to reduce the wait times of just standing there waiting for the bus, because you can know with much more certainty when it will arrive. It can drive up volumes and usage of public transit.
Conversely, what builds resistance?
There's a lot of fear, concern, some of those things. The tricky thing, though, is the thing it's easy to do is to survey people. And a lot of times maybe not more often than not, but a lot of times people lie on surveys. Not intentionally, but their stated preference isn't necessarily their behavior. One of the great things about IoT is you can actually start to observe real behavior of people in the real world. We do this online all the time, right, on mobile and web. Now that we can bring the same sorts of thinking that we did, A/B testing, et cetera, not only to what we can do on mobile and web, but actually to people in the physical world, that will allow us to much better understand their preferences, and I think that's quite powerful.
Well, and another interesting dimension in this in terms of resistance and acceptance will be the move from connected objects, which deliver information, to networked and managed objects. I've been looking a lot at cars lately, and cars are so interesting because in the interests of safety and in the interests of speed, time to driving, it's pretty clear to me that the American autonomy around the man in the vehicle driving the speed he wants is going to get severely challenged. Like, roads will know how many cars are on it and manage how fast you can drive. Things like that are going to happen.
Yeah, I'm not ready to predict whether or not the road will tell me how fast to drive, but I do think
there are subtle ways it happens now. In Japan, if you drive, once you go over the speed limit, you just get this pinging. The car just pings. And ding, ding, ding. And you got to get, like, if you're going to drive, you got to get used to that. And trust me, you don't spend more than 30 seconds with that, before you slow down yourself.
No, I think there's a whole bunch of ways in which you can try to incent behavior that you're looking for. And again, the question about how much people want to drive, I think is one that we can ask in surveys. But at the end of the day, we'll have to observe how much people will want the self-driving car to drive in many situations.
Yeah, and how much we want to be autonomous beings versus kind of socially minded beings may differ from one country to the next.
Yeah. If I could just add to another one, sure. You were talking about behaviors as well and challenges. If we take that not only to the consumer side, but also the organizational side, I think one of the things that's organizationally challenging is that the technology organization in a non-IoT world has a very well delineated set of responsibilities and things that they're in charge of. Data center, some mobile devices, maybe things that sit on a desktop. But when you do start to combine the virtual world with the digital world, then I think the organizational construct becomes more challenging within an organization. So, does the CIO or IT, in a retail store, do they get to touch the merchandise now, right? Or do they have to worry about the physical environment? Right now, those responsibilities are very, very different, right? The head of store ops is. And the CIO, et cetera, they talk about maybe the POS system or something like that. But now, if there's IT in the HVAC system, if there's IT, connecting the cameras so that you know whether or not somebody's there and can send a store associate to help somebody in the store, if you have tags within the merchandise so somebody can walk out and the payments happen without having to pass POS. That changes the set of responsibilities, and that's going to be very challenging, I think, to organizations in a B2B IoT world.
Yes, and typically the argument will be won by the person who shows up with the data. That typically seems to sway the argument at this point.
That would be a happy day if organizations were all that data driven. I'm not sure all
because showing up with the data means a certain thing.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I think. Want to take questions from the audience?
Sure.
Okay. Do we have any questions?
Hi. So you were talking about behavioral economics, and I was just wondering how you see like demographics and generational sort of differences playing out over the long term in this sort of thing.
Yeah, I don't know. All right, I think there's an easy gloss, which is millennials, have these preferences and they're much more open about their data and all that sort of thing. But I think if you look under the surface, it's much more complex than that. I think the great thing about Internet of Things and the data that we can receive is we can actually really start to understand those sorts of behaviors much better. And I think there are generalizations you can say about different generations, but they move. These things are dynamic, and I think there's a lot of detail. I mean, millennials have segments as well, and so being able to understand those, I think, is one of the things that we'll be able to do.
Oh, hi.
Oh,
Over here.
somebody else is running this. That's good.
You talked a little bit from the supply chain perspective about data sharing and how it will end up in contracts. Could you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, when we start to talk with executives now, the terms of contracts nowadays in supply chains, some of it has to do with money, some of it has to do with quality of service or delivery times, and sometimes vendor management. There are all kinds of different ways in which they think about that. But what we're starting to see is data becoming one of those currencies for contracts. It is one of the things that people will negotiate for. How often you get the data, which data, whether you get metadata associated with it, all those sorts of things. Ari had a conversation, discussion this morning about polite privacy. A lot of those sorts of things, if you think about the corporate equivalent of them, would carry over as well as potential terms of contract between organizations that are negotiating about data.
And likewise, there will probably be codicils, just a sec. There'll probably be some sort of contractual law about how much you can share that awareness, because I would think if you knew a whole lot of touch points around shipping, some hedge fund would want to know that. And can you pass that on? Because you're saying things about world demand out of Hong Kong. Is that a fair thing to share, or is that considered proprietary?
Thank you.
I think the gentleman in the front had his hand up first, then we can go to you, okay?
Okay, sure. Really enjoyed the talk, Michael and Quentin. So earlier you mentioned that the real value for Internet of Things is going to come from merging of the B2Bs with B2Cs. My question is in reference to that. These two sectors are usually having different cultures, different styles of leadership, different ways of looking at things, and how, if you can add some color to how do you facilitate the merging of these cultures, if you can, it would be great.
Lock people in a room, and they don't come out to the solution. I don't know that there's a one magic bullet solution to it, but I think all of the things we know about change management, all those things that we know about trying to adopt a different mindset and perspective, I think can be quite powerful. And you do find people who have crossed that boundary during their careers, and so those people can often be touchstones for people on both sides, ambassadors, translators, et cetera. Because look, in all of our careers, we have to keep learning, and that's this is just another example of it.
Speaking personally, there is a touchstone that frequently isn't addressed or whatever, touched. And that is, who is this exercise in service of? Who is in the room? If I'm talking here, I want to know who the audience is, so I try and pitch it at the right level. B2B, B2C, to put it in the crudest possible terms, who are we trying to get money from now, right? And we'll address the consumer, and we'll put together a data set, or we'll have certain things that are monitored at this point in this context, because that's who the audience is for this. I think that will be one way of pivoting between those situations.
Thank you, guys.
So I want to circle back to what I think Quentin was talking about earlier. Data sharing sounds sort of benign, like sharing, it goes both ways, and you can argue that if I'm a consumer, I'm getting a value. But at some point, you stop being a consumer and you're a citizen, and data sharing can become coercive. So where I'm going with this is, I saw the automatic car thing yesterday, and I thought that's great. I can afford to get one, and I can get value perhaps from my insurance company. But what about when we tip over and you'd sort of expected that I would share that data, and I'm poorer, I can't afford it. There's a social and implication there for society as a whole. We haven't talked about those kinds of issues, so I wonder if you could just speak about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, if you think of data as potentially being an asset, then it is currency, and then the wealth of data that you're thinking about things in those terms can be quite powerful. And then as a society, we do have discussions about how wealth can be used and in what ways, et cetera, and we constrain certain uses, and so we can imagine those sorts of things happening in data as well. The other interesting thing is, though, as Ari suggested this morning, there are choices we can make as technologists about how we choose to use data, what sorts of affordances we give to people from whom data is received, et cetera. And so some of those, not all of those choices have to be embedded in regulation. Not all of those choices have to be embedded in law. Some of those choices will be embedded in the systems we choose to develop. And so I think as technologists also, we have a responsibility to think about how we think the users of our systems would like to be able to suggest how data gets used, how much it gets shared, et cetera. And so I think those things are not just considerations for public policy, but also considerations for people who build systems.
And there's I think a subtle undercurrent to what you're saying that bears respecting or keeping in mind. I don't know if you legislate this, but there's this great TED talk about the benefits of shyness and privacy, right? Of being a shy person. And that's orthogonal to where a lot of things are going. We have really, in just a few decades, transited from being fairly autonomous and private individuals to now being connected individuals, and we're heading towards being individuals or economic and political actors within a larger network. I spoke of cars, but you can see other ways in which that traffic becomes a metaphor, that you give up individuality for the sake of this larger thing. And your willingness to share may be seen as a kind of positive or negative social attribute, and you'll pay the consequences of not being a sharer. You may already, among millennials, if a millennial didn't have a Twitter handle on his resume, you might wonder what was going on, right? I don't know what you do with that. It's society.
As a counterpoint or the opposite side from the B2C scenarios, when you think about sharing information in the B2B world, we see a lot of our customers are very interested in how can they monetize data with Internet of Things, right? How do we distill best practices and sell it to our customers? What are you seeing as the emerging patterns around these information value chains as Internet of Things comes about?
Yeah, we've talked with a lot of clients in our firm also about how to monetize the data, and there definitely are some opportunities. As Quentin suggested, your data exhaust is somebody else's gold mine, right? So, that's a great mind shift for people to do and think about. That being said, when you actually look at the pools of value, a lot of the at least near-term potential value comes from using your data to be more effective and efficient doing the core things that you already do. Because if you look at the opportunities in terms of your own supply chain, in terms of your own marketing, et cetera, usually there's just a huge amount of potential value you can use just to reduce waste, reduce safety stock, improve throughput, all those sorts of things. And so that you push that there. Now that being said, Quentin and I talked a little bit before our discussion here about but then there are times when the disruptive business model does show up, and so thinking through that is very challenging, again, for legacy reasons for incumbents, but it will be where the sort of hidden threat comes from, and trying to figure that out, I think, is pretty important.
I think we could take one more question.
Hi, my name is Young Ha, and actually I'm a Korean working in China, and I believe it should be like a Internet of Things global, not Internet of Things in the America. And then someone's got to be like making standards. So since you're from a global institute, how do you think it's going to roll out globally? Like, are we going to keep like being somewhat like slaves of Google and Apple and some kind of like major companies, or
I think there's room for slaves of Tencent and Baidu as well. Come on. Samsung, plenty of places we could be slaves of.
But
seriously,
yeah,
are you
seriously,
speaking in
yeah.
cultural terms? Or?
No, I mean, I didn't mean to be offensive.
No, it's not.
But I was kind of curious, is it going to be still led by like few sets of companies, or is it going to be like schools or governments or other organizations stepping in when the things go out globally?
Yeah, I mean, as I said a little while ago, we do think that there's even if you measure it in terms of dollars, or whatever your favorite currency is, there is almost as much potential impact of Internet of Things in developing markets as they're in developed, and there is far more volume, far more actual opportunities to deploy IoT in those markets. In terms of which companies will lead, we are seeing both very large companies, whether they're tech companies, industrial companies, or others, as well as smaller entrepreneurial firms. And some of them are here in San Francisco Bay Area, but there are an increasing number of them in Asia, in Latin America, in Middle East. This is not a phenomenon. I mean, one of the powerful things about this technology and connectivity is that it does enable people in far-flung places to actually take advantage of it. Now, that being said, there is also tremendous value in proximity. I mean, there's a community here of people who talk about these things all the time, and that's why this is it's been a bubbling cauldron of innovation for generations now, of generations of technology, amongst other things. But I do think there's real opportunity, and we're seeing real companies start to use these technologies, not just in the United States, but in other markets as well.
I want to speak to that because you don't offend me at all. I spent 13 years living in Asia and really feel there are many, many interesting ways to look at the interaction of technology, consent, and culture, and the willingness of people to interact differently with technology. And I was primarily in Japan and Singapore, which are places where people consent to be, if you will, networked individuals, part of a community, much more so than you find in the United States, where there's much more autonomy. And that's just a question of choice. Right now, technically, bigger awareness is better awareness, right? Google just wants to capture all the data possible. Amazon wants to get all the data possible. General Electric looks at all its touch points and thinks, throw more sensors on it. And there's a corollary there for governments as well. That speaks to systems of control and individuals as networked objects in the future. The good news is it's never been cheaper to become someone with a large networked awareness as well. How that gets worked out remains to be seen. We're in the early days of this.
Good place to stop.
Okay.
Hey, thanks so much.